Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Always exciting to dig into a new case.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this one, well, let's just say it's a doozy. We're talking about the murder of Travis Alexander and the trial of Jodi Arias.
Oh, yeah, that one. It's definitely a case that sticks with you.
For sure. So we're basing this deep dive on the Wikipedia article about the case, and let me tell you, it's packed with twists and turns.
And media scrutiny. Oh, man, this case was everywhere.
It really was. So to kick things off, let's paint a picture of our two main players, who were Travis and Jodi.
Well, Travis Alexander, he was kind of a larger-than-life character. A salesman, motivational speaker, and get this, he even did stand-up comedy.
Wow, a real triple threat.
Right.
So it's like a pretty charismatic guy.
He was. And then you have Jodi Arias. She was an aspiring photographer, worked a bunch of different jobs before landing a sales position. And guess what? Same company as Travis.
So they met through work.
Yep, at a conference.
Yeah.
And things moved pretty fast. Jodi even converted to Travis's religion. Okay, so they hit it off, but you said things moved quickly. Were there any signs of trouble early on?
Oh, definitely. Their relationship was, well, it was intense. Lots of ups and downs, big arguments, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's never a good sign. And then, tragically, in June of 2008, things took a horrific turn. Travis was found murdered in his home in Mesa, Arizona.
It was brutal. The crime scene was something else.
You're not kidding. It was a really violent crime. What were the details?
Okay, so brace yourself. Travis had been stabbed 27 times, his throat was slit, and he had a gunshot wound to the head.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, it's rough. The medical examiner said his jugular vein, carotid artery, trachea all slashed.
Yeah.
He even had defensive wounds on his hands, so he definitely fought back.
It's just awful. Knowing those details makes it even more chilling.
And to make things even creepier, they couldn't even figure out if the gunshot happened before or after his death.
That's so eerie. So where did investigators even begin with a case like this?
Well, it all started when Travis missed a big conference call, which was totally out of character for him.
Yeah, that would definitely raise some red flags.
Exactly. So his friends went to check on him, and yeah, that's when they found him.
I can't even imagine walking into that. Did they have any leads right away?
Suspicion fell on Jodi pretty quickly, and for a few reasons. She was acting strangely, for one. Plus, she had cuts on her hands.
Okay, that's suspicious.
And then there was the rental car she returned. Tons of miles on it, way more than you'd expect. And some red stains.
Red stains. Oh, man, that's not good. But was there any solid evidence linking her to the crime scene?
There was a key piece of evidence found at Travis's house. A damaged digital camera hidden in the washing machine.
Hidden in the washing machine. Okay, what was on the camera?
Well, what they were able to recover was pretty damning. Deleted photos of Jodi and Travis in suggestive poses. Then a photo of Travis in the shower.
And
then a picture of someone, probably Travis, bleeding on the floor.
wow, that's pretty incriminating.
Yeah, it was a big deal. And it wasn't the only physical evidence connecting Jodi to the crime.
What else did they find?
They found a bloody palm print at the scene. And get this, it contained both Jodi and Travis's DNA.
So at that point, the investigators had their prime suspect.
They did.
Yeah.
So they confronted Jodi with all of this evidence.
And what happened? Did she confess?
Not quite. She actually went through a whole series of stories. First, she claimed she wasn't even in Mesa when Travis was killed.
Wait, so she just denied being there altogether?
Yep. Then her story changed. This time, she said 2 intruders broke into Travis's house, killed him, and attacked her too.
So she went from not being there to blaming it on intruders. That's a pretty big shift.
It is. And it wasn't until 2 years after her arrest that she finally admitted to killing Travis.
2 years? That's a long time to maintain a false story. Why did she finally confess?
It's hard to know for sure, but I'm guessing the mountain of evidence against her played a role. But even in her confession, she insisted it was self-defense.
Self-defense.
Yeah, she claimed she'd endured years of abuse from Travis and that she killed him to protect herself.
So her confession completely changed the narrative. It went from a straightforward murder case to a question of whether Jodi was a cold-blooded killer or a victim of abuse pushed to her breaking point.
Exactly. And that's what made this case so fascinating for the public. It wasn't just about solving a crime. It was about trying to understand this complicated relationship and figure out the truth behind Jodi's claims.
And that's where the trial comes in, right?
Yeah.
This is where things really exploded in the media.
Oh, yeah, the trial was huge. International news, the whole 9 yards.
I remember it seemed like everyone was glued to their screens watching the testimony unfold live.
It was one of the first trials to be broadcast so widely online, and it really grabbed people's attention. Heck, even a 48 hours episode about the case ended up being used as evidence in court.
Wow, that's wild. So you've got this brutal murder, a messy relationship, and a trial playing out for the whole world to see. That's a recipe for a media frenzy.
Definitely. And the trial itself. Full of twists, shocking moments, conflicting accounts of what really went down between Travis and Jodi. It was like a real-life drama, leaving everyone wondering, was Jodi a victim or was she a master manipulator?
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of this trial. What were the main arguments presented by each side?
Well, the prosecution came out swinging. They argued that Jodi was jealous and that she'd planned the murder. Even claimed she staged a robbery at her grandparents' house to get the gun she used to kill Travis.
So they were painting her as a cold and calculated killer.
Exactly. The defense, on the other hand, focused on Jodi's claims of abuse. She testified about the alleged physical and emotional abuse, even showing the jury a crooked finger she claimed Travis broke during a fight.
So they were trying to build a case for self-defense, showing that she had reason to fear for her life. But did they have any evidence to back up her claims?
They called witnesses to testify about Jodi's state of mind and some inconsistencies in Travis's behavior. But there wasn't any direct evidence of the physical abuse she described. Then, the trial took a really unexpected turn.
What happened?
They played a phone sex tape in court.
Whoa, hold on. A sex tape. How did that become part of the trial?
The defense was trying to paint Travis in a negative light. And on top of that, Jodi claimed during her testimony that he had pedophilic tendencies.
But was there any evidence to support that claim?
None whatsoever. It was a risky move by the defense, and the prosecution jumped all over it.
I bet they did. So you've got all this conflicting information, these intense accusations flying around. It must have been tough for the jury to sort through it all. Did they have any expert opinions to help them make sense of things?
They did. They had psychologists who testified for both sides. One argued that Jodi had PTSD from the alleged abuse, while the other diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder.
So even the psychological assessments were up for debate. This case really did have it all. It must have been a nail-biter, waiting to see what the jury would decide.
It was. The prosecution had built a strong case for premeditation, while the defense was trying to humanize Jodi and raise doubts about Travis. But ultimately, it was up to the jury to decide what they believed. And after weeks of testimony and deliberation, they finally reached a verdict.
And that verdict was?
Well, before we reveal the verdict, I think it's important to understand how the legal process worked in this case. The trial was divided into different phases, each with its own set of stakes and challenges.
That's a good point. It wasn't just a simple guilty or not guilty decision. So, starting with the initial phase, what was the jury's decision regarding Jodi's guilt?
After all the evidence and arguments, the jury found Jodi Arias guilty of first-degree murder.
Wow. So they agreed with the prosecution premeditated murder.
Yep. The jury believed that Jodi planned and intentionally killed Travis, that she didn't act in self-defense.
That's a huge decision.
Yeah.
But wait, didn't you say there are multiple phases to the trial?
Right. Because they found her guilty of first-degree murder, the trial then went into what's called the aggravation phase.
The aggravation phase? What's that all about?
Basically, the prosecution has to prove that the murder was especially cruel, heinous, or depraved.
And why is that?
It's to determine if the defendant is eligible for the death penalty.
Oh, wow. So the stakes get even higher at this point.
Exactly. And in Jodi's case, the prosecution argued that the sheer brutality of the murder, the stabbing, the shooting, all of that qualified for the death penalty.
So did the prosecution make their case?
They did. The jury agreed that the murder met the criteria for aggravation, meaning Jodi was now facing a possible death sentence.
Man, that's intense. So what came next?
The trial moved into the penalty phase. This is where the jury decides between the death penalty or life in prison.
And I imagine this phase was incredibly emotional.
Oh, absolutely. Travis's family gave victim impact statements, sharing their grief, their anger, their pain. It was heartbreaking.
I can't even imagine what they were going through. And what about Jodi? How did she handle this phase?
Well, this is where things took another unexpected turn. She actually pleaded for her life.
Wait, really? But hadn't she said before that she wanted the death penalty?
She had. But during the penalty phase, she completely changed her stance. She begged the jury to spare her life. And get this, she wore a survivor t-shirt to court.
A survivor t-shirt? That seems like a strange choice, to say the least.
It was definitely a bold move. A lot of people saw it as a blatant attempt to manipulate the jury and the public.
So the jury had heard all the arguments, all the testimony, and seen all the evidence. What was their final decision? Did they sentence Jodi to death?
Well, they deliberated, but in the end, they couldn't reach a unanimous decision. It was a hung jury.
A hung jury, what does that mean?
It means they couldn't all agree on the death penalty. The vote was 8 for death and 4 against.
So what happened then, if the jury couldn't decide? Who did?
Since there was a hung jury, the judge had the authority to decide Jodi's sentence. He had 2 options: life in prison without the possibility of parole, or life with possibility of parole after 25 years.
Wow, that's a huge difference. So what did the judge decide?
After one of the most publicized and controversial trials in recent history, the judge sentenced Jodi Arias to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
So that was it, the end of the road for Jodi Arias.
Well, legally speaking, yes. But the story didn't quite end there. Jodi filed multiple appeals, claiming that there had been errors during the trial. She even accused the prosecutor of misconduct.
Prosecutorial misconduct, what was that all about?
Her defense team claimed that the prosecutor, Juan Martinez, had been too aggressive, that he'd made inappropriate comments, and basically tried to turn the public against her.
So they were arguing that he'd created a media circus and that she hadn't gotten a fair trial?
Exactly. But even with the appeals and all the controversy, Jodi's conviction was upheld.
So despite all her efforts, the court stood by the original verdict.
They did. And the media frenzy didn't die down right away. People kept talking about the case, debating it online, dissecting every little detail.
It's amazing how much this case captured the public's imagination. Why do you think that was?
I think it was a perfect storm of factors. You had the shocking crime, the complicated relationship between Jodi and Travis, and then the trial itself. It was like watching a real-life soap opera.
Plus, this was one of the first trials to be so widely available online, people could follow it in real time.
Right, it created this sense of immediacy and involvement. And let's not forget the social media aspect. Everyone had an opinion, and they weren't afraid to share it.
It's fascinating how technology has changed the way we experience these kinds of events. You know, there was also all that talk about a mystery witness during the trial.
Oh yeah, that was an interesting twist. A defense witness was allowed to testify in secret, and the judge sealed the testimony.
A secret witness. Why was that?
The judge was concerned for the witness's safety, but it definitely added to the mystery surrounding the case.
Did they ever reveal who the witness was or what they said?
Nope. The identity of the witness and their testimony are still sealed to this day.
Wow, it makes you wonder what kind of information they had that needed to be kept so secret.
It does.
Oh.
Some people think the witness might have had information that could have helped Jodi. Others believe it was just a distraction tactic by the defense. We may never know the truth.
So even after all this time, there are still unanswered questions about the case.
There are, and I think that's part of what makes it so compelling. It's a case that keeps us thinking, keeps us questioning, and keeps us fascinated.
It's a story that forces us to look at the dark side of human nature and try to make sense of the senseless.
Well said. And it reminds us that even in the face of overwhelming evidence and a guilty verdict, there are still mysteries that may never be solved.
It's kind of crazy to think about how the Jodi Arias trial, with all the media coverage and public obsession, feels like a preview of the true crime craze we see everywhere today.
Yeah, it really does feel that way. The Arias trial was like a turning point, one of the first to be blasted all over the internet, which paved the way for the intense scrutiny and online commentary that's become so common with these big cases.
It's almost like everyone's become an amateur detective these days, you know, poring over evidence and forming their own theories based on what they see online.
And that's where things can get a bit messy. Don't get me wrong, it's great that people are engaging with these cases and thinking critically about the justice system, but social media isn't exactly known for its accuracy.
Right. People are so quick to jump to conclusions without having all the facts, and misinformation spreads like wildfire.
Exactly. And that can have real-world consequences. It can sway public opinion, put pressure on law enforcement, and even impact the outcome of a trial.
So how do we navigate this world of true crime content, especially in the age of social media? How can we be more responsible consumers of this kind of information?
It boils down to critical thinking. We need to be skeptical of what we see online, check our sources, and be aware of our own biases. It's easy to get caught up in the drama, but it's important to remember that behind every sensational headline, there are real people whose lives have been deeply affected by these crimes.
That's such a crucial point. We can't forget about the human element, the victims, the families, the ripple effects of these tragedies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have to approach these stories with empathy and respect for everyone involved.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Jodi Arias case, what are some of the key takeaways you hope our listeners will remember?
I think this case really shines a light on the complexity of relationships, the darkness that can exist within people, and the power of the media to shape our perceptions.
Hmm.
It's a reminder to be critical thinkers, to be aware of our biases, and to approach these stories with empathy.
This deep dive has been a wild ride. A brutal murder, a defendant weaving a web of lies, a trial that captivated a nation. It's a story that continues to resonate with people, raising questions about justice, truth, and the human condition.
It certainly does. And as we've seen, it's a case that's had a lasting impact, changing the way we consume true crime and how we view the role of media in society.
It's been a fascinating journey unpacking this complex and captivating case. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
The pleasure was all mine. And to our listeners, if this case has piqued your interest in the intersection of law, media, and human behavior, keep exploring. There's a whole world of true crime stories out there, each with its own unique lessons and insights. Just remember to approach them with a critical eye, an open mind, and a healthy dose of skepticism. Until next time, keep diving deep. Tell us what you think about this episode. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.